Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining this Ignite Webcast. My name is Josh Chappell, and I work on the Office 365 team. And if this is your first time, Ignite events are a series of technical workshops for IT professionals and Microsoft partners. The Ignite Webcast series will address different technical subjects and scenarios that are really beneficial to anyone who wants to increase their knowledge of the Office 365 suite. So today we're excited to have Josh Maher on the call. Josh is a content developer for Office 365. And in today's webcast, Josh will dive into understanding IP and URL change notifications. Today's session provides a really great opportunity to hear directly from a Microsoft employee, especially one who's worked so closely with the product. Today's webcast will be about an hour, and we're going to leave time at the end to field a few questions, and we're even going to have some survey questions for you. You can go ahead and type your questions into the link chat box during today's presentation, but I recommend that you hold them till the end for the Q&A session. We are recording today's session, and you can find the video recording and the material that you're going to see presented at the Ignite site. Let me go ahead and paste the link. So yeah, Dean, we are recording today's session. And speaking of that, since we are recording, please understand that you may be captured in today's recording. So if you do not wish to be captured, please do not type in the window, or please leave the meeting and feel free to view it at a later time. So that's it for me. So Josh, whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. So I'm Josh Maher. I am in the content publishing Office 365. And I focus on stuff related to onboarding or deployment of Office 365, so content around that. One of the areas that a lot of customers end up being curious about or exploring on their networks, filtering the IP and URL, filtering connections to Office 365 using IP or URL filtering on their network. And that filtering sometimes is done out of necessity for traffic shaping. Sometimes it's done based on the need for security requirements, etc. The main thing to understand, and I'll just talk briefly about the filtering itself, and then we'll jump into kind of how the change notifications occur and how to get all of the right information you need if you're going to do any filtering. So the main thing to look at, or what is filtering in general, if your users are here in your network on the left-hand side of the screen and they're trying to get to anything on the internet, whether that's an existing SaaS solution that your company's using, Office 365, MSN, CNN, whatever. They're all coming from your network through your firewall, the internet to get those things. And most of those connections are over port 80 and port 443. They're outbound initiated, so the users on your network initiate those connections. And once the connection's established, there's some two-way traffic. They request things like images from the website and text, and those things are returned over that connection. And for most of these things that people connect to over the internet, a lot of reused content that takes longer to download, such as images, are distributed via content delivery networks. Most SaaS solutions, Office 365 itself, and other web solutions like MSN or CNN use these content delivery networks to get images cached closer to the end users, being the point of access for your enterprise network, so that they take a shorter period of download. So in general, this is what we're looking at, and the question is, on this red line that you see that goes from your users to Office 365, should there be some filtering that says if someone's going to the suite of things in Office 365, should there be some kind of filtering or direction of traffic along that? And for some companies that's yes, and for some companies that's no, and so that's what we're going to walk through. So the important thing to note about our IP and URL filtering information that we provide is that we don't maintain an SLA for providing the updates of the URL or IP address information. This is to note because we do provide an SLA for the service, the Office 365 service, and Office 365 ability is different than the IP and URL filtering list. So I want to make sure that everyone kind of understands up front, and we can talk about it more towards the end of the presentation if anyone's interested. Difference between the SLA of the list of IPs and URLs and the SLA of the service itself. The other thing to note is that the URLs don't change often. So while we don't have a rigorous SLA around IP or URL information, the URLs don't change often. And so we highly recommend that URLs themselves are what is used for filtering. Another thing to note is that we don't have a separated list by region or type of Office 365 tenant. So if you are in a particular area of the United States or a particular country, we don't have a separated list of things to filter for those separate regions. And similarly, we don't have a separate list for different types of Office 365 tenants. So if you're an educational customer or a government customer or just an enterprise SKU customer, we don't have separated lists for those. The other interesting thing to note, and I'm going to walk through this here as soon as we're done with this text, this slide of text, is that the URLs and IP addresses on the Office 365 page are not included in the individual workload pages, and vice versa. So we'll walk through that as I kind of walk through where all this information is and how to get the list that you need. And as earlier, filtering based on URLs is the recommended approach to the whole thing. Filtering based on IPs is certainly possible, but mostly because the URLs don't change often. It's a lot easier to filter based on URLs than it is to worry about filtering based on IPs. Notification of changes is only available via RSS at the moment. I'd like to talk to you guys more towards the end of the deck about what that means and what that could look like in the future. So I'm going to walk through here, and I certainly understand there might be some questions that come up. Feel free to save it towards the end. It'd be a lot easier. If it's burning, write it down, and then we can circle back later to answer the question. So this is the main Office 365 IP and URL page. There are a couple of URLs that point to this page. This is the TechNet view. There is a view in onlinehelp.microsoft.com as well. Both of them point to the same page, and we're trying to use just the TechNet page as the we'll point to. And there's a few things to note about this page. So if you are in the middle of a new Office 365 deployment or have recently deployed Office 365, this page outlines what you need to know for filtering, or at least where to start for filtering. And you'll see at the very top, circled in red, is the subscribe to RSS. This is the only method that you can use to be notified when something changes on this page itself, and this being the main Office 365 page. There's some text here about the networks and how we use them, and about why we recommend URL filtering, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The next thing you'll see is this change notification. This link here is the actual change log, and I'll show you these links here in just a sec. And again, a reference to subscribing to the RSS Feed, and then hang on a sec. And then the last thing you see on this view anyway is the list of other workloads and the pages for those IP URL filtering for those pages. You have to give me a second. My view of the presentation as the presenter is still loading. Give me one sec here. There it goes. So if we were to first top link, this is the RSS feed that you would see. And on this RSS feed, you'll notice that the RSS feed contains the information about each of these individual workloads. So you'll see that if Office 365, it looks like, I'm getting a few IMs here. It looks like maybe a few other people, it hasn't refreshed on their end. It took me a little while to refresh on mine. So I'll talk slowly as this comes up for folks. If someone could mention in the window when you're able to see the slide titled RSS Feed, I would appreciate it. And so on this page, you'll notice that for each, the suite itself is at the top, and then each workload is included here, right? Exchange Online, Forefront, Link, etc. And so when you subscribe to this single feed, you'll get an update when any of the workload pages changes. So if you are an Office 365 customer and you have the full suite, you subscribe once, you'll get a notification that something changed for any of the workloads. If you're an Office 365 customer and you're only using Exchange Online, you'll still get notification when any of the pages change, but you'll be able to tell which of the pages changed so that you can then go and see what had changed on those pages. So you'll easily determine your discretion. And it looks like a few folks it's working and a few folks it's not. So I'm going to keep going. If go ahead and hit retry, and you can view it later as well. So the next thing that was on that main page was the change notification page itself. Now this is the change notification page for the Office 365 suite. And you'll notice just kind of the date of revisions along the left and the description of the revision on the right. The way that it ends up working is once you've set up your filtering with the URLs from the main page and you've the RSS feed, you'll get a notification via RSS that something has changed, and you'll want to come back to this change notification page to see what changed on that page. And this is the one that applies to the Office 365 suite. So anything on that main Office 365 suite page is listed in this change notification page. So it's going to be different for each workload. But if you need to know about one workload, you don't have to then come in and filter yourself for all of the things that happen on workloads. So if you're not using SharePoint, you don't need to go look at the SharePoint change page, etc. So you can see these are pretty straightforward, just the date, and then at the bottom here, the latest change here is just added a new IP range. So on the 18th of November, we added a new IP range, and for customers who are subscribed to the RSS feed, they would have gotten an RSS notification. They could have come to this page, seen the new range, and then added it in. And so that's these first three sections here that are on the main page. Now for each of these, the workloads, looking at number 3 here on this slide, each of these services, there's 5 service pages here. and each of them have their own page that outlines all of the things that you would need to filter for those that workload specifically. So let me just walk through those really quick. So here's the Exchange Online IP and URL page. Now, if you were an Office 365 customer and you were only using Exchange, you would want to take the information from the main page. I went back a slide here, so the content that's down below, which we'll look at in a little bit, as well as all the IPs and URLs on this Exchange Online page. And in total, that would be what you would need to filter to use Office 365 and Exchange Online. Now you'll notice I had mentioned that each workload, for example, Exchange has their own change notification page. So you can see at the top, that's what we're pointing to here. If you had received an RSS notification that an Exchange Online IP changed, you would come to this change notification page to see that information. Here's a few of the specific URLs that Exchange Online's worried about, and then you can see a pointer back to the main page for Exchange Online. Then below this, you can see the beginning of the actual IPs themselves. Moving on to the next one, each of these pages is designed a little bit differently. There are different people involved, making these on the internet. So you'll see kind of a difference in how some of these are organized. And this is the SharePoint page. So if you follow the link to the SharePoint page, you'll see the IPs and URLs, and it's a relatively long list. So I split it into two screenshots here. But in the single list, you can see all of the IPv4 IPs, and you can see the IPv6 IPs for SharePoint. And similarly to Exchange, if you were an Office 365 customer using SharePoint Online, you would need the IPs or URLs from the main Office 365 page, as well as the ones from this SharePoint page. Now, if you were using all three, Exchange, SharePoint, or Exchange and SharePoint inside of your Office 365 suite, you would need the information from all three of those pages. And the reason, again, for that differentiation is because not all Office 365 customers use all of the services within Office 365. So you can see on the SharePoint one down below, the last thing here is the change log. Instead of linking off to another location, it's just built into the single page. So for SharePoint Online, you come to a single page and it has all the information in one. Forefront Online protection, this is up for those customers and has the ranges for the IP addresses. Again, a link to their change log and a reference back to the main page. So you can see that the trend here is that each workload has its own page. Here's essentially the same thing as Forefront. This is for the Exchange Online protection workload, and it has the IP ranges, the change log, and all of each of these pages is maintained separately. And when you subscribe to the single RSS feed, as kind of we showed earlier, you get access to being notified in one feed of a change on any of the workload pages, and then you would have to come to that workload page and you would look at the changelog link to find out exactly what single address or a couple of addresses were added or removed, and then you could add or remove those individual items from your filtering. If you were doing a new deployment, you wouldn't have to worry about the changelog so much. You would worry about coming and just highlighting the entire list here and pasting that into your access list. And so this is the last one being link, reference back to the main Office 365 page, the change, and link. You'll note they included some, like Outlook.com, and that's because the link service data from Outlook.com and SharePoint.com. So they're calling out those URLs that they're using specifically, even though those are also URLs that we call out for the Office 365 suite page. So the last thing on the main Office 365 page is down below, which would be, we kind of reviewed what was up above, and down below are all of the URLs, FQDNs, etc. for the suite. So URLs, FQDNs for the suite, highlighted some of the known content delivery network URLs. You can see there's a list of IP addresses for Office 365. There's a list of IP addresses to use with the remote analyzer tools. There are the URL and IPs for services, as well as the URLs and IPs for the Office 365 Pro Plus package. And so you can somewhat split these out a little bit depending on what you're using and how you're using it. We recommend using the URLs only for filtering, but certainly understand that the IPs are what's possible or capable for some people only, so list those out here. So this is, if we expand in those IPs, it's a fairly long list. We do also apply the IPv6 addresses here. So you'd be able to use IPv6 entirely for Office 365, and they're listed on the other services. Now, before I jump into content delivery networks, I was just going to look to see if there are questions that had come up in here. James had a question about how many RSS feeds need to be subscribed to cover all cases. And that answer is just one RSS feed. It's the one RSS feed, and it will tell you if something has changed on any of those pages for any of the workloads. And that view, let me just jump there really quick because it's an interesting question. So it should be loading for all of you shortly. So the concept is that all customers would subscribe to a single RSS feed, and that single RSS feed would give you a RSS notification when any of the IPs or URLs were updated, and on any of the workloads. So the feed itself includes information about the Office 365 URLs, an IP address page, Exchange Online page, the Forefront Online Protection, the Link Online, and so when one of those changes, essentially one of the feed items in the or for that category or a new feed item would show up for that category saying that some changed on that page. It doesn't tell you what changed on the page, so if a specific IP was added or if a specific IP was removed, but it tells you that something on that page was changed. So to get the most up-to-date information about what changed, you would need to look at the change log for that page. So looking at kind of the second question here from Joe about wouldn't it make more sense to have an RSS feed for each of the change log pages? That's a really good question, and one thing we found was that a lot of customers don't know that they need to add more than one these lists of IPs or URLs to their filtering list. And so the reason we consolidated the notification down into a single view was to make sure that any customer using any one of the workloads needs to understand that some of these other URLs being changed, specifically if you're using 365 with Exchange Online, there's two that you need to change already, and you may not know that. And so that's why we've consolidated into a single RSS feed. I think the deeper question from Joe is, why isn't there a payload of information in the RSS feed itself? And that's something that we're actually, instead of going to the changelog page after you get the RSS notification, why not just have the RSS notification include the URL that changed? And that's something that we're looking at implementing, and we're not sure what that timeline might look like, but we're looking to see how feasible that is. And last question before I go on, looks like a question about the Exchange Online protection URLs. You need to unblock both, and the question is, or the answer is that yes, you would need to unblock both. It's a good question, and I don't know if there's any goal to consolidate those two at some point in the future. I know that in the near term or foreseeable future, for most of us anyway, there's no intention to consolidate those two lists. When you're looking at the URLs themselves versus the IPs, a lot of the URLs that you need to filter for are going to be the same between, for in this example, SharePoint, SharePoint.com and SharePointonline.com. We call those out in the Office 365 page. You'll notice here this is the Forefront Online page. There are additional URLs that are filtered for. So if you're doing URL-based filtering, there isn't new URLs. Only if you're doing IP-based filtering is there an IP range that you would need to filter. And the same is going to be for the Exchange Online protection. Right? There's no new URLs to filter for. There's just IP addresses. And of course, we include the IPv6 for the Exchange Online protection. So I hope that is a little more clear, that really you only end up needing to look at a lot of these IPs on each of the workloads if you're doing IP-based filtering. All right, so content delivery networks. This question comes up a lot about how content delivery networks are used and why Microsoft can't tell all of their customers exactly what things to filter for if they're going to do filtering for Office 365. So I don't have a diagram of how content delivery networks work. I'm just using the same diagram here. All highly available on internet-based need to do something to make their images and things downloaded quickly. All customers want those things to be highly responsive, especially when we start to look at very large-scale online properties. Whether that's MSN from a consumer side, you might think of something like Facebook. These are all things that use a similar technology where when the customer over here on the left-hand side asks for something on Office365.com, they go through their firewall, they get to Office365.com, and in the process of negotiating those requests, they get referrals to download the images from something that's cached closer to that that company or wherever that person's getting onto the internet from. And so for some things in Office 365, they're cached and images are available from things like these content delivery networks. And the content delivery networks are both internal properties, so Microsoft-owned properties, and third-party properties, so other partners that Microsoft uses. A common one on the internet is a lot of web properties, both consumer and enterprise, use Akamai as a CDN. And that is one of the ones that we use for Office 365. Office 365 also has some images that are shared on the live space. So one of the URLs that we ask that customers allow access to is the MSN properties. There's also a couple of Microsoft-specific content delivery networks, so CDN URL that's out there. And so the problem is that while we know some of these general URLs for customers, the underlying IP addresses are things that are really moved from Office 365 and even Microsoft to be able to supply the total list of all IPs that these content delivery networks might use worldwide. And so for that reason, we can't provide the IP address information for filtering to those IPs of the content delivery networks. We can make it work for the stuff that we own and are building for Office 365, but not for the partners who are essentially syndicating the image download procedure. If we were to remove the image download component on the content delivery networks, then we'd have this other problem where customers in all of the far reaches of the world would not necessarily get a fast download of the content from Office 365, and the experience would be lessened. So the main goal in using the content delivery networks is to improve that speed and efficiency for all customers, whether you're in a large city with a lot of people trying to get all of the basic images off of Office 365, and there's some kind of a bottleneck from that city, or whether you're in some far-reaching location in the world and aren't near a Microsoft data center, and so need to leverage a content delivery network in that regard as well. So because of this varying degrees of proximity to Microsoft data centers, we leverage both Microsoft-owned content delivery networks, so hosted Microsoft data centers, and we leverage third-party content delivery to do this caching and distribution. The issue that we hear from some folks is that the IP addresses, we don't provide that list of IP addresses, and we can't provide them because those endpoints simply aren't within our control. And then the other issue is that they change, so even if we were able to provide them, having a streamlined change process from these third-party content delivery networks would be a very difficult experience to deliver to customers. And let me before I jump into the future conversation here, I was just taking a quick look at the questions that are here. And there's a question from Kyle, just wants to make sure that we don't need to, that customers don't need to block both IPs and URLs, or unblock both IPs and URLs on their filtering. And so the answer is no. If you are filtering based on URLs, then just filter based on URLs. And in fact, that's going to be the recommended approach. Those URLs, are going to represent all of the IPs that we're going to use for the services. And so when IP addresses change, the URLs don't necessarily need to change in terms of how often the URLs change, it's pretty rare that a URL is going to change. We might add URLs based on a new service that gets added or new functionality that kind of mandates its own URL, but otherwise there isn't much reason to change the URLs. So prefer to only filter based on URLs if you have to do any filtering. If can't filter on URLs and need to filter on IPs, then that's okay, but there's really never a need to do both. So in the future, there will still not be an SLA for the updates. I know that's a common question. People like to know exactly what the SLA is for the updates to get out there. The SLAs of the service are around the service itself. If you have an internal requirement that requires filtering, URLs are the best bet. That will get you, as I just mentioned, filtering to stuff that isn't going to change often, if ever. That said, we are making some changes internally to make sure that there is more lead time to the list. We completely understand that it's important and critical for customers to get this information in a timely manner, and we want to make sure that as much as possible is available to customers who are using URL filtering, as well as customers who are using IP filtering. Can't put an SLA around it, but we're working very hard to add a lot of lead time to that so that you have plenty of time. Filtering, again, based on URLs is our recommended approach. RSS updates will become more useful. I kind of discussed this earlier based on that last question around the notification inside of RSS, including information about what changed itself versus just what workload the change was on. That's something that we're working on, and I don't have an exact time, but that's something we're working on there. And the last piece is that we want to explore alternatives to RSS notifications. We'll have polls in a little bit, just kind of around some general questions, but one of the questions in there is about RSS notifications or what alternatives you would be interested in. The reason for these notifications obviously is for you, the customers. So for me, getting you the information that you need the most, I'd like to understand if you have any preferences around how you receive that information. It's certainly something that we take highly into account. So all my contact information is here. We can look at it in the question and answer as well. So with that, I'm going to actually leave this for an open Q&A. I know this is an important topic for a lot of people. You can start filling some questions in on the instant messaging. I've included both my email address and my Twitter handle here if you'd like to reach out to me to follow up offline. That would be fine. And then we're going to jump into some polls while I take a quick look at the questions here.
Yeah, so thanks, Josh. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the polls now. But yeah, if you didn't get your question answered, feel free to type it in again into the chat window, or and then Josh, wherever you feel like starting, go for it. But here's some of the questions up on the survey right now.
All right, so Kyle, you have a good question here about blocking outside personal email, such as Outlook.com. So using Exchange Online, the Outlook.com namespace is going to be used. We've had other customers have issues with that, where they wanted to block personal email, customers using the Hotmail service that's now Outlook.com. You can block the login.live.com. I know that's one method some customers have leverage to essentially break the logging in to Outlook, the live, a live ID, and which is the Hotmail ID. So they would be blocking login.live.com and still allow access to outlook.com. It's not a perfect solution because customers, when they go to login information to outlook.com, they get kind of an imperfect experience. But I guess if you were blocking on your firewall access to gmail.com, it would be kind of a difficult experience for that end user anyway. So I don't think it would really be any worse. So another question from Daryl about the change notification in the message center. That's perfect. That's exactly the kind of thing I was interested in getting some feedback on. The change notification inside the message center, I think that's an absolutely valid thing to ask about. We've looked a little bit into what features are available to us to put messages into that message center, and some of the difficulties that have just kind of come up are around how often do these change. The IP addresses change more frequently than the URLs do. So that's a big change. If a large block of IPs or IP ranges was added or removed, and so would that overload the message center? Can people opt in, opt out of getting these in their message center? So there's a few of these just things with how the message center functions and what the parameters exist for us to not overload it. But I think it's a valid question, and it's certainly one we've started to look at, but we don't have answers to how to make to some of those questions around making it not overwhelming in the message center. And so then here's another question around being able to get RSS feeds for individual workloads, an RSS feed for Exchange Online versus an RSS feed for SharePoint Online. That's an interesting question. None of them change very often, but there's certainly going to be value in only having, but getting 2 notifications a month instead of 1 notification a month. I don't know if that's super valuable. They don't change that frequently. It's just that when any one of them does change, you get notified relatively fast. So that's kind of the difference. Email alerts, that's certainly an interesting one. You could subscribe via RSS, using something that does email. Like if the if this then that web service, the if the then that web service can look at an RSS feed and send you an email notification when that RSS feed changes. So that's certainly one solution. A built-in solution where you could subscribe via an email. Right now, we don't have it plugged into anything like that. There is the TechNet email notification service that's out there, but that's for very large, broad email notifications. So we haven't really looked at email. That's an interesting one to explore. Any other questions out there around how the notifications occur, how to get to the complete list of everything you need to filter, or content delivery networks?
And while people are thinking of more questions, again, you can find the video recording and the material at that link. But here's one more. Oh.
So click to run. I'm assuming that's a topic you're hoping to get in a future um, Ignite webcast.
We have one
Uh,
right there. We actually did this, Kyle. We did an Ignite webcast on this. You can see it right at that link. You can see the video. But yeah, it's the deployment.
yeah,
Thanks.
excellent. I purposely left a lot of time for Q&A, mostly just because of some of the feedback I've had from other customers who are pretty passionate about how the IP and URL filtering works. So if there's sparked your interest, or you want to follow up offline, feel free to send me an email. It was in that earlier slide, and be happy to discuss with you, kind of what we're doing, how to use the information the best for your environment.
Let's see. I think we have one more question from Alan.
Yeah, let's see here. So Alan, I'm not sure I follow your question. So the question is, URL filtering requires that all email traffic pass through servers. I assume that's the recommendation then. So URL filtering doesn't necessarily mean that all email traffic passes through the proxy servers. Uh, if your SMTP infrastructure uh, can talk directly to the internet, then it should be able to pass through whatever that connection is. If you're doing some kind of traffic shaping where you have an email server in one network location, and you're trying to direct anything to a URL out of a point of presence in a different area, then I could see that might be problematic, where you're trying to move that traffic between two network locations via some kind of URL routing versus filtering. Um, the Outlook Anywhere connection. So the Outlook Anywhere connection, if that's not going through a proxy server today, then it doesn't have to in the future. In fact, um, and maybe this wasn't completely clear, is that there's no need to do any URL filtering at all. All of your traffic going out to Office 365 by default is going to use whatever your end users, whatever path your end users internet traffic passes over. So if your end user goes to com and they don't have to route through a proxy, then you don't have to add that to make Office 365 work. It's more of a question around, if you are forcing people to go through a proxy and you do have some specific URLs that you're trying to lock people down to, how do you allow them access to these online properties? And in that case, I recommend you use URL filtering versus IP filtering. If you're not locking down any of the traffic, then there's no need to kind of a proxy or be filtered at all. So no, don't add URL filtering if you don't have to. But if you do have to, try to use URL filtering versus IP filtering. I hope that answers your question, Alan. And if there are other questions, feel free to put them in.
I think we'll leave about another couple of seconds here to see if there's any last minute questions. But while we do that, first of all, thanks Josh, and thanks everyone for joining this Ignite webcast. And we'll have more in the future. You can find them on ignite.com, ignite.office.com/events. You can find all of our upcoming Ignite webcasts. But it looks like there's no more questions. You have Josh's information, and let me go ahead and post mine too, if you want to get a hold or have any suggestions feel free to contact me on the Office 365 community there. And with that, Josh, anything else, or I think we could probably end this call.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you everyone for your time.
Oh, yeah, thanks everyone. We'll see you at the next Ignite webcast. Thanks a lot.